Good morning. Welcome to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith and Michael Morris. Michael, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Scott.
Today we have an interesting two topics we want to cover. First is about the most recent fair accidents that happened at the Ohio State Fair, where unfortunately one man was killed and others were severely injured. The second part of our program today, we'll talk about drunk driving and how it affects a case you may have if you are the person who was injured as a result of a drunk driver. But let's get started with the fair ride issue.
It's a pretty hot topic issue.
Well, it's been in a lot of the news, Michael, and as it is in some news reporting agencies, you don't get the full story. But I'm here to tell you how this goes. At the current time, I don't represent anybody involved in the incident, but I've had many cases that are similar to that. So, first of all, the families need to be taken care of. The injured parties need to be getting the best medical care they can get. The person who unfortunately passed away, their family needs to be consoled and grieved and not bothered. They will make a decision on what they're going to do from a legal perspective and when they want to do it. So that's first and foremost. The injured parties and the decedent's family need their privacy. If they need a lawyer, they should go get one on their own, and hopefully no one's bothering them to be employed to do that. So, that aside, if and when the family or the injured people want a lawyer, the one thing the lawyer needs to do is know how to do these cases. And one of the most utmost important priority things to do is preserve the evidence. The sooner someone can hire a lawyer, the sooner the lawyer can start preserving the evidence. Because when it's gone or tampered with or manipulated in any way, it could change the outcome. So if someone was injured and they haven't retained counsel, they would be best served to get counsel as soon as possible once they made that decision if they're going to pursue it. Preserving the evidence also includes hiring experts. In this particular case, a lot of issues come to mind on what it is that needs to be done. What I think of immediately when I see this type of incident is a failure to properly inspect the equipment before it's used. I read in the paper today that there was an expert who generally said that the metal arm had rusted from the interior and that the inspection would not have included the interior of the metal arm. Well, I would question that. An adequate inspection by someone who is knowledgeable of the topic should be able to test not only the exterior that you can see, personally observe, but also the interior. That's where experts come in. And that's why, if this case was in my office, I would have retained several experts. One would be what would be considered a metallurgy expert, Michael, and that's someone who looks into the metal and see if the metal was the cause, if it broke, if it was fragile, if it was weakened for whatever reason. If you take the newspaper's rendition of one of the experts' summary of what may have happened, it appears that maybe the metal fatigued because it had rusted and worn. When you have equipment that you're going to put out in the public and it's going to rotate at high speeds, inertia is created and it puts a lot of gravitational forces on the metal. Another issue that comes up is the design of this ride, or that there was a defect in the ride. If in fact this product, this ride, when it was designed and when it was manufactured, met all standards and was adequately equipped to withstand all the weight, the pressures, the inertia, the forces, the delta V's, the things of that nature, then it was probably approved. But over time, like anything else, it needs properly maintained and it needs to be properly inspected because wear and tear will cause the structure to weaken. So that would fall on the people who are required to inspect it. Maybe it's the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Maybe it's the ride owner. Maybe it's the ride maintenance people. Maybe it's the inspectors that they employ. Maybe they didn't do a proper inspection. Maybe they didn't do an adequate inspection. Maybe the ride wasn't maintained. Maybe it wasn't kept out of the elements. All those things go into consideration. That's why you need more than one expert. But, Michael, do you have any questions in that regard?
Well, you brought up three very important things, so I want you to break them down this way. My favorite thing that you talk about is evidence and reconstructing what happened. The video, the way I learned about it, I had the sound down on my phone and I happened to be doing something else and I hadn't even seen the news story. I saw the video of the accident. Does the video of that, because that's a pretty brutal thing to watch, that's not the end of the evidence, right? That's just the beginning.
Oh, that's just one portion of the evidence, which may or may not give a lawyer or jury enough information as to why it happened or what happened. You see the arm breaking off, you see people flying through the air, unfortunately, you see debris, but why? Insurance companies who insure this ride and the ride owner and ride operator will immediately have people out to the scene to do their inspection because they're going to immediately want to minimize or try to defend whatever it is that could be claimed against them as if it was not their fault. So they're out there right away. Video in and of itself is terrible because you see exactly what happened, and it's unsightly.
But you can't tell why.
But you can't tell why.
See it,
you
but
can't
you
tell
still
why.
have to get on the grounds physically.
Right. You've got to go
that.
to the actual product itself. You have to look at the actual areas where the ride came apart, where it broke, and to determine why it broke. It's not supposed to break. It's not designed to break. Shouldn't be designed to break. And it should be maintained not to break. And if there is a defect or a wearing, tearing, fragility of that metal, it should have been determined and discovered by an adequate inspection.
Well, it's because they're temporary structures. I mean, they're not up all year round, correct? So
No.
somebody has to be responsible, and that's why I think this is an interesting case for somebody like you to break down. Who's responsible? Because you've got the manufacturer who made it, you've got the person who constructed it, you've got the person who checked it. These aren't the same people. And then you have the fairgrounds, which operate the ride.
You have one or many that could contribute to needlessly endangering these riders. They advertise the fair to come out to the fair and ride the rides. They want your money. They want you to show up. They want you to buy concessions. They're advertising something that should be advertised as a safe product that you shouldn't have any fear of getting on. They needlessly endanger the riders from all of those areas you just mentioned, whether it is the manufacturer, whether it is the person who maintained it, whether it is the entity who is to have inspected it, whether it is the Ohio Department of Agriculture. You don't know until you go down the chain of who had this product from the start until the time it broke to see who didn't do their job, because someone didn't. This thing could have been prevented if proper steps were taken.
Well, and I think a lot of people will say, oh, it's just a 1 in a million chance. A week later, Cedar Point, I won't ride these rides just for this point because I know there's some horror story that's going to happen if I get on one. But Cedar Point, this coaster's going up and it got stuck, so everybody had to walk back down. Good thing it got stuck where you could walk back down, not going down that hill and something happened. But these things at the fair are temporary structures. And that was the thing I never understood, that there's so many people that have to check off on this thing to say, yeah, it's good to go. Now you have this incident where you have a fatality, but we have, 3 other people that are injured?
At least 3 other that I understand. I mean, Michael, these rides take on a lot of force. And you don't advertise to have someone ride your ride if it's unsafe. So you're responsible. This is accountability of the people who should have done what they should have done to protect and prevent this. This wasn't an act of God. This is someone not doing their job. This
Right,
is really what it
it's
comes
not a
down to.
tsunami. This thing happened, and there were people that checked it off saying it's good to go. So let me ask you this. Let's take the fatality issue out of it. The people that are injured, what are they supposed to do now to get compensated for this?
Well, the earliest thing, the thing they should do once they decide, is to hire a competent lawyer who's done this and knows how to do this. I think the member of the family, or the man who died, his family has contacted a lawyer. And I think they hired a lawyer that has experience in doing this. But I think there's other that maybe have not retained counsel. But the first thing they should do is retain counsel so we can preserve the evidence and get the experts involved and make sure that they go out and examine all of the parts, the moving parts, where it was about the ride, whether it was the maintenance. Look at all the records. Look at the inspection records. I mean, it's combing documents. It's combing timelines. It's combing individuals who are identified as being responsible for this ride from the time it was set up until the time of the incident.
But also their medical. That's another big.
Well, that's a different issue.
It is a different issue.
That's a different issue.
Along the path that you've said this before, if you're going to retain counsel, if they're going to retain you, make sure that you medically are okay. At the same time, you're taking care of the evidence and the rest of the case.
Right. Well, as we've talked about before, on many instances, any kind of case that I handle, and I handle injury cases from trucking to premise liability, like this case, automobile and motorcycle. The injuries and the damages that you suffer are something you're going to have to handle with the help of your attorney, but mostly through your medical providers and your family. As a lawyer, I want to help get these people back to where they were, back to square one, to be made whole, so they can get back with their life. That's the type of thing that we can do, and we can only do that with money. Unfortunately, our system, or fortunately our system, is civil enough that it's not an eye for an eye. The only thing we can get for our clients is monetary compensation. And I think that's a good system. We probably have the best system in the world. It's not perfect, but it's the best, because it allows us to be civil with each other. And instead of asking for someone to die as a result of the death that occurred in this fair accident, we of course don't want that. If there's criminal action taken, that'll be something that the state will take. But on a civil perspective, the only thing we can do for people that are hurt, that are injured, is get them compensation to make them whole, financially, monetarily. A lot of people say, how do you do that? I can't walk like I used to. I can't jog. I can't carry my child.
I'm afraid of rides.
I'm afraid of rides.
There's trauma that goes into that.
There's trauma that goes in all of that. Post-traumatic stress disorder is common with trauma. It doesn't have to come from being in military action. It can come from everyday living and severe crashes like this. Even people who witness this will never be the same. So your damages come in many forms and fashions, but the only way that we can compensate them is monetarily. So how do we do that? Well, that's going to take an entire show, and we'll talk about that later. But at least you have to get the money paid back. They're out of pocket, and then for all of the non-economic losses, which is I can't walk, I can't talk, things of that nature, and the fear involved, the psychological effects.
Which you have experts that can help with that.
Absolutely. I mean, a case like this, you're going to have several experts. You're going to have them from the liability standpoint. Who was liable and why were they liable and what percentage they were liable. And then you have experts that talk about the damages that have been sustained, whether it's medical, including surgery, or whether it's psychological. Not everybody's affected the same way. Some people will be not hurt at all, barely hurt, may not be psychologically affected. Others, it could affect them to a greater degree. Obviously, physical injuries are easy to discern, but psychological injuries, completely different story.
I know we want to get on a different topic, but I want to, this is something that, as a common person, that I'm curious about. There seem to be 3 or 4 different people that could be liable for this. It's not one of the 3 or 4, it could be all 4. Correct?
It could be. And what a jury may do is determine percentages of each person or entity who's responsible. It could have been a breakdown. It's like the chain. You know, the weakest link of this chain could be the reason it broke, but there could be other reasons that chain link became weakened.
That was the point I wanted to make, is that I, as an outsider looking in, you look at it and say, well, who's really responsible? You're the one that's going to find out who's responsible. I mean, you're going to work on that, whereas it's kind of like we've discussed this before. If an insurance company says, hey, here's the payout, we want to get this closed now, this might be something that goes on for an extended period of time because there's so many different hats involved. Absolutely.
It's a moving parts situation. You're going to get resistance from the other side, the right owner, the right maintainer, the right inspectors. You're going to get resistance. It's going to take time. You're probably going to have to file a lawsuit to get what you want because they don't normally cooperate.
Right. Well, the next topic, I think you should tease it before we go to break so that we get people to come back to it. You mentioned it earlier. Where are we going to go from here?
Well, I think we want to talk about drunk driving and how it affects you as a driver on the road. Obviously, we don't want to encounter one, but if you do, what happens?
Right. Well, you're listening to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith, and we'll be right back.
Excellent.
I was like, shit, there's more questions. We might want to do this again next week and just go through. Do you know what I mean?
Well, we hit the highlights.
Right.
Okay.
I'm saying when I was saying there's 3 to 4 different people that are involved, I was like, there's so many people. If I'm one person and I get one lawyer and they just go after the fare, that's win or lose. The ride, the inspector.
Well,
the ride manufacturer,
but
where the ride was stored and what kind of conditions it was stored
you just have
in.
To examine all that.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of paperwork.
So many
but I don't
things.
think people are thinking of that way. They're thinking of one ride, the fare. They're not thinking it might not be the fare is going to have some liability to it, but.
Well, maybe, and I didn't get into this, and this gets a little technical, but if you sue the state of Ohio, you're stuck in a particular court called the Court of Claims, in which you're not entitled to a jury. And the nickname over there is the Court of No Claims, because the judges that are hired by the state.
Wonder how that works.
To make determinations. Now, there's a couple good judges over there now that don't have a problem being fair, but usually they hire these judges like, you lose, you lose, you lose, you lose.
But imagine that somebody hires an attorney that goes, yeah, we're going to go after the state, and you lose. Now what do you do?
Well,
I know
so what you try to do from a strategy standpoint is avoid suing the state if you can, and sue private entities who may have more brunt of the responsibility. Now, if the Ohio Department of Agriculture is in charge of these rides, they're probably requiring the rider, the owner, not the rider, the owner of the ride to have done X, Y, and Z. So then we go to the owner of the ride.
Right.
And if they didn't do that X, Y, and Z, I'm better off suing a private company with a jury than we are the state without one.
Right. That's why I was saying I opened it up and I'm like, I got to close that off because we could have gone down that road. All right, so we're going to go drunk driving. And I'm going to ask you if there's a difference in OBI and drunk driving because the statistics are all lumped together.
Okay.
DWI, OBI, whatever.
They've changed it. OMVI has changed over the years dramatically, and I'll explain it.
Oh, yeah, because I got about over 25 years ago, I got busted for drunk driving.
Wrongfully, of course.
No,
That's not what I expected.
Oh, no, God, no. I'm not rightfully.
right.
And I made my bed, and I laid down, and I said...
You slept in it.
Yeah, exactly. I took responsibility for it.
All right, you lush. Let's get back at it.
No, I don't drink damn near as much, thank God.
Damn near as much. Well, you were drinking so much then. It's like it's huge now still.
DJing at a bar, free drinks coming up to the DJ booth. Now when you got to buy them for yourself. Oh, no, I had like 6 beers over the weekend. Couple Friday night, couple Saturday night, couple Sunday night. That was it. You know.
Glad I stick to heroin.
You bring us back.
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
No, I thought you stuck to meth.
Do
See
it.
if I screw it up.
Okay. Here we go.
Welcome back to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith and Michael Morris. Since the break, Michael, we're changing topics.
Yes, we are moving on from the state fair, at least for now. Here's what we want to talk about, drunk driving. And the reason I bring this up is I saw an old friend posted that an attorney friend of hers was supposed to meet her somewhere and was involved in a car accident with a drunken driver. He was not drunk. He was hit by a drunk driver. And I think it's very important because when I'm looking at the statistics on the state website for how many of these accidents happen every year, now I need your clarification on this because they have it listed as OMBI, and I'm looking for drunk driving statistics. So it's all kind of muddled in there, but it's all impaired driving. I wanted to concentrate on drunk driving just because it was something that when I saw it irritated me because if I was hit by a drunk driver and I'm just driving home, I want to go after that person as hard as possible. So before we get into that, can you classify what is OBI or OMVI versus drunk driving?
Well, let's start from the beginning. The law is divided up on the civil side and the criminal side. I do the civil side. I bring cases in behalf of individuals for injuries that are caused by someone who is at fault. On the criminal side, if someone is charged with impaired driving, as using your term, they will receive a citation and have to appear in court. On the criminal side, where there's a prosecutor who represents the state, which means all of us, against this person who did something illegally and violated a statute. over time, since I've been practicing law in the last 35 years, they've changed how they characterize drunk driving from OMVI, operating a motor vehicle under the influence, drunk driving, OVI, which it is now, which is simply operating a vehicle under the influence. That could be a drug, that could be alcohol, that could be a combination of both. Anything that would impair you. They've tried to change the statute over the years to include anything that would impair your driving from what you have ingested, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's combination. So it's not really a big deal. The reason it's changed over the years is the criminal prosecution trying to encompass anything that could be critical to impaired driving so they can prosecute.
So it's more strict because we can lump it under one.
Well, more general so they can encompass more action of people who out there in their cars drinking, smoking marijuana, or taking pills, doing any type of illicit drug, anything like that combines with their inability to operate their motor vehicle in a safe manner. They needlessly endanger all of us by doing that. And we know how it goes because we pick up the newspaper and read it all the time. In your particular instance, the attorney sounds like he was the one that was injured as a result of a drunk driver, person who was impaired, whether it was drugs, alcohol, or both. He should know, probably, to retain counsel.
Right, he might know. I was just throwing it that he was an attorney because I found it. I hated that he was in the accident, just hearing or reading the story, and then I think, he's an attorney. He wants to get justice. Let's just call it what it is. But I'm thinking if he's not a personal injury attorney, he still has to turn to somebody to help him out with this.
Chances are he'll know somebody. Here at this show, maybe, for instance. He may call me. He may call someone else. But he'll know enough lawyers. But he probably knows someone that does what I do. So I'm not worried about him finding someone. Again, it still applies like we talked about the Fair case. Need to preserve that evidence. Going a little further, let's assume I represented this attorney. We'd want to have an accident reconstruction done. You might say, why? He got arrested for OVI. He went to court on the criminal charges. He blew into a breathalyzer that showed he was over the legal limit of 0.08 of blood alcohol in your system. What else you got to do? Well, insurance companies like to put up lots of defenses, Michael, for the people that they insured, including this drunk driver. And they'll do everything in their power to minimize what they're ever going to pay and minimize that they have to pay at all if they can help it. They're in the business to make money.
Even though that somebody has done something willingly breaking the law, they are still going to defend that person.
Absolutely. And they'll defend him to the hilt. And if you file a lawsuit, they will provide a lawyer free of charge to this drunk driver. And that lawyer will defend that drunk driver as if they were innocent. They didn't do anything wrong. And it's all the attorney's fault in that instance, that he must have done something wrong. And regardless of the fact that there was a drunk driver on the road, maybe they're going to claim that the attorney went left of center. I don't know the facts of the case. But what they'll try to do is find as much at fault of the person who was injured as a result of the drunk driving as opposed to just accepting responsibility and accountability.
Right, it's his fault. If he wasn't driving that day, he wouldn't have got hit.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's a proximate cause issue, but it goes back and forth and back and forth. But, you know, I'd be out of business if insurance companies were fair. They're not fair. They're the opposite of fair. Because all they're interested in my opinion, is increasing the profits and cost per share that they trade on the stock market. That's my opinion. Now, it may not be everybody's opinion, but I've been doing this for 35 years, and I haven't seen any change.
You have more experience with it than any of us. All I'm looking at is this drunk driver, if he wants to get... So now, an attorney can be provided that's basically fighting for the insurance company, not really fighting for him. It's right. He's on his side, right. But it's so we don't have to pay out.
When you see a court case, anybody that sees a civil court case on an injury claim, and you see an attorney representing, in this instance, the drunk driver, you should know automatically that person was retained by the insurance company, paid by the insurance company, and even though that lawyer represents the drunk driver, the insurance companies are calling the shots, how that case is going to go, and whether they're going to pay or they're not going to pay, and how much they're going to pay.
So then, in that instance, you know this person's at fault. This person, the client has retained you, and now you have to kind of present a bulletproof case that this person was drunk and hit my person? Like, how can you go
Well,
after it?
there's a couple avenues here. Let's just talk about it generally. So the drunk driver is found to be at fault. Then the insurance companies like to shift gears and say, well, okay, you may have broken your leg, but let's see your medical records for the last 10 years and see if you've ever had a bad leg before, so we can blame it on something that pre-existed it. So, dealing with that. Another phase of these kind of cases is what we call punitive damages. So if you got a guy that's consciously under the influence of alcohol, he just got blasted and then took drugs and drove his car and doesn't even remember it or blacked out, he needlessly endangered everybody on the road, every one of us, Michael, which causes me concern when I drive at any time on the weekend after 10 o'clock p.m. because that's when they start to come out. But in any event, you've got punitive damages that you can also recover. Punitive damages are penalizing damages, exemplary damages that a jury could award on top of compensatory damage to say to this driver, you were reckless and consciously disregarded the rights and safety of everybody else, and you need to have more penalties because you don't seem to get it. And you should have never gotten behind the wheel, but you chose to do so. A jury could do that. They may not choose to do that, but it is an option available on a drunk driving case in most instances.
Is a drunk driving or OVI case, that's not the same as like the way an insurance company will come to you and want to write you a check for the damage to your vehicle. I mean, we've talked about that before. If you deal with them directly, they don't want it to go to court, but they'll pay you something.
Well, in the drunk driving case, like any other car accident case, the property damage is usually resolved early on. If the insurance company for the drunk driver says, oh, it looks like we're probably at fault, we'll at least pay the property damage, and then they'll argue with you about that. But once you get into the bigger damages, loss of life, loss of limb, things like that, they'll start resisting how much they're going to pay and looking for ways out of not paying.
I see. So it's not as cut and dry as...
Oh, no. This stuff is... the insurance companies make it very difficult for guys like me. It makes it very expensive for my clients to hire experts when we really don't need to. In the drunk driving case, I'd probably hire an accident reconstructionist. I want to see how fast this drunk driver is going. I want to see exactly where he was in the road to cause this collision. I want to make sure there's no question who's at fault. You know, another thing I want to touch on, Michael, that is related to OVIs, drunk driving, is the current and constant use of cell phones. You've got people now who are sober but driving their cars while they're texting or emailing. Well, there are statistics out there that show doing that diminishes your attention to the point where it's almost as if you're drinking and driving because you're not paying attention to the road. You're too busy looking at an email, at a text, writing one, to be focused on what you do. We're driving these 2-ton pieces of metal at high speeds. You got to be focused. You got to pay attention, because if you don't, you cause collisions, and that is very bad because we're seeing it now more and more, and it doesn't seem to be curtailing. It seems to be getting worse, and that's almost as bad as drinking and driving. So punitive damages may be available in those instances.
I think we should do that one next week because I already have the research done for that because I couldn't believe how many people text and drive and how many accidents are coming from. It's like 4 times more people get hurt texting and driving, and I know neither one of us do that, right?
Correct.
Exactly. I want you to tell everybody one last piece of what we're talking about today, and then that's it for the week.
Well, as far as the fair ride is concerned, there's not much you can do. Hopefully that you can rely upon those who operate the ride to have it safe and in a safe condition. With respect to driving, it's a different story. You can do defensive driving courses. Be defensive. Be safe out there.
And don't drink and drive.
And don't drink and drive.
Okay. That'll be it for this week. Thanks for listening to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith.